Welcome, everyone. I'm Lynn Pascarella, president of the American Association of Colleges and Universities. Thank you so much for joining us for part two of the CLDE Coalition's launch of its new report, Every Student, Every Degree, College Civic Learning for Today's Students and Tomorrow's Democracy. Along with working sessions organized by institutional sector, our time together today will focus on aligning CLDE-related initiatives for greater collective impact, connecting CLDE expansion with related priorities, including student success, career readiness, high-impact practices, and belonging, expanding student CLDE participation, overcoming the obstacles in tracking and assessing students' gains from CLDE participation. Today's opening panel brings together several of the major scaling efforts in play in support of CLDE's mission. And I'm thrilled that we're going to hear the insights and learn about the efforts and get updates from President John Alger from American University, President Mac Powell from the Accrediting Commission for Community and Junior Colleges, Aaron Thompson, president of the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education, and a member of the Multi-State Collaborative for College Civic Learning and Democracy Engagement, and Raj Venakota, president of Citizens and Scholars and founder of the Presidents for Civic Preparedness. So we're going to jump right in, and I'm going to turn first to John Alger. John, I'd love to hear what you're doing on your campus of American University, which happens to be in our nation's capital, to foster civic learning at this moment.
Great. Thanks, Lynn. Well, as you can imagine, American University is a community that prides itself on political activity and political activism. And we have large numbers of students who study political science and public policy. There's a lot of experiential learning in DC with internships on the Hill and nonprofits, et cetera. But like many campuses around the country, we had significant challenges with polarization and protests over the past year. I actually started in July, but before I got here, there were a lot of tensions related to the Middle East conflict. And at times, people were shouting at one another and not listening. So this year, we are starting a new initiative called the Civic Life to focus on civic engagement, civic education, and civil discourse across the entire curriculum to talk about what it means to be an engaged citizen. And the focus is not just on rights, but on responsibilities of living in community together, with the thought that how we engage matters if we're going to sustain a pluralistic democracy, and that we have to be the model in higher education for society. So we're working specifically on building certain skills that should sound familiar, like critical thinking, communications, information and data literacy, leadership, teamwork, problem solving, and ethical reasoning. We're going to be led by a steering committee that's going to build on the university's strengths in civic learning in the curriculum and in the co-curriculum. And we're developing a cadre of what we call student civic fellows who will get special leadership training in civic learning and will work with us in the administration. We'll have a presidential speaker series, which has already begun, and other events intended to raise the level of dialogue on campus around these issues, and include, importantly, the faculty and staff and community and alumni, as well as students. We have a new Dialogues Across Differences initiative, which many campuses have been doing to try to get people to engage across political and racial and religious differences. And the overall goal is really to lower the temperature to build these civic skills, to think not just about how do we disagree and prove our point, but how to have open minds and open hearts and learn how to build bridges and find common ground to try to solve problems, not just identify problems.
Yeah, one of the challenges we face today is the growing anxiety among students where they're reporting that depression, despair, mental health issues are now surpassing financial considerations as the primary reason students are either dropping out of college or not attending in the first place. And I often hear from students on campuses who say, even engaging in dialogue with people on the other side of an issue is an act of harm in and of itself. And so I just won't do it. I won't re-expose myself to harm. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we do hear that frequently from students from a variety of different backgrounds. And We have to acknowledge that there is real harm that occurs on our campuses and in society. You know, hate speech is protected by the First Amendment, but it can cause real harm. So I think this is where developing those skill sets really matters. We know that we can't protect students from being offended, from hearing different points of view. And in fact, they should hear different points of view at a university. But this is where helping everybody to recognize not just their rights, but their responsibilities to create a certain kind of climate and environment really matters, right? Just because you have the right to do something doesn't mean it's always the right thing to do. So to help students think about the impact that their words and their actions have on other people, that's what you need in a pluralistic democracy. And that's what we're trying to teach.
And it sounds like you're doing a remarkable job on your individual campus. So how can national organizations help campuses like yours and leaders who are interested in catalyzing this work?
Well, and I know you, Lynn, and many of our colleagues on this call today are really in the vanguard of this, but certainly you can start by, and many of you are doing this, articulating and reinforcing the importance of this work on civic engagement. So many people in the general public and in politics think that our mission is just about workforce preparation. Of course, that's important, but these skill sets help for workforce preparation as well as for engagement in civic life. So reinforcing that message at every turn is really helpful. Identifying and sharing promising practices, helping us to figure out how to scale up good ideas is really helpful, and perhaps getting foundations and other funders interested in this work. Training the trainers who can then go back to our campuses and leading efforts on civic education. You can certainly help with providing programming that includes practical examples of ways that institutions are making progress in spite of some of the external political and social pressures. And then I'd say finally, providing safe spaces for leaders to talk about the challenges they face in this arena, especially right now with some of the political pressures, and helping higher education build bridges on this topic, not just with each other and with your organizations, but also I would say with pre-K to 12 education and other sectors. That is a great service that the national organizations can provide.
That's wonderful. We're going to turn now to President Powell. Mac, AACJC has made civic responsibility a required general education outcome under student success. Tell us about the impetus behind that.
Well, I think I would say that we all recognize that an education is not just about, to paraphrase John, the career outcomes, but it's also about the broad understandings and skills and competencies that a student takes away from their education. So in our accreditation standards, we identify a series of knowledge, skills, and competencies, and those are related to communication, quantitative reasoning, critical thinking, information literacy, civic responsibility, which is what we're here to talk about today, and the ability to engage with diverse perspectives. And I think what John mentioned is that we have to be able to speak across a very broad range of ideas, perspectives, data sets in our lives. And, speaking across the aisle or being able to think critically really begins with actually that engagement. So what I like about this initiative is that it's not about an idea. It's not about a particular outcome for each student. The outcome for each student really begins with that idea of we need to be engaged. To start beginning the conversation is an impressive outcome that all of our higher educational institutions can foster and support, nurture, and with the help of accreditation, assess, which is how well do you do it? Right? I think that's kind of what accreditation brings to it. It's not just that we ask institutions to bring students to these ideas, but it's to ask the institutions, how well do you do it? How well are your students engaging with their communities? How well are your institutions, or your students that is supporting the idea of engagement with diverse ideas? So I always think that accreditation is not always thought of well across the spectrum of those of us that participate in the academy. But at the end of the day, what we really want to do is bring all of us to a realistic conversation about how effective are we with bringing people to these ideas, and how effective are faculty, staff, students, administrators, helping students participate in these very important activities.
Can you say more about the positive impacts that this kind of work has had on students and on the communities in which you're located?
Yeah, so I think I want to start with saying we're 137 institutions. A lot of those are in California, but some of those are in the Pacific. I think that different states have different levels of engagement with civic responsibility, have different levels of engagement with participatory governance. Um, our Hawaii institutions are amazing. They have a lot of education in their college K-12 system, which prepares them for civic responsibility, and not everyone participates to that degree. I think that what's the impact? The impact is that all of our institutions realize that this is an important element of education. These are federally funded programs with students that number in the, millions. And the idea that all of us have to begin to think about, it's not just how much they earn, it's not just what career they achieve, it's also who they become as people and how they participate in our world that is important. And so I hope that by placing these in our standards, and which is a beginning, but really the more important thing is that institutions begin to assess how well they're doing. It will impact, again, the millions of people that we serve.
Thank you so much. And just briefly, how would you respond to the critics of accreditation who say higher education is just, supporting each other's mistakes? What's the real value of the accreditation in American higher education?
Are there any proponents of accreditation these days? Let's start with that. So yeah, the critics are wide. I would say that for those of us that walk into a college campus, it's like a city, and there are many stakeholders. There are faculty and staff and students and administrators, and they all have their own competing ideas about what's most important for students, which is who we serve. And it's very hard for institutions that are 150 years old or 200 years old to begin to think differently. And what accreditation does is it focuses all of those diverse stakeholders on one primary outcome, which is how well are your students doing? And what's the numbers? What's the evidence? And we're going to bring in a group of peer evaluators, meaning people that are much like you, and we're going to have a conversation about it. What college presidents, provosts, and faculty tell me is that that's the only time that actually really happens in a fair and neutral environment. Because otherwise it's stakeholders that are embedded having their own conversation about what they think is best for students. So what's the value of accreditation? Third party, arbiter, focused on what is the only thing that matters, which is the outcomes of our students.
Thank you so much. I want to give a special welcome to Lenore Radicios, who I left out of the intro. Lenore is at Aspen and Achieving the Dream, doing extraordinary work. So Lenore, I'd love you to tell us more about your work and how you work closely in helping presidents and their senior teams develop implementation strategies for the most urgent initiatives. What have you seen as the primary barriers in going from planning to implementation of CLDE initiatives?
Thanks, Lynn. So from my experience, I would say that some of the challenges to implementing CLDE work is very similar to the challenges in implementing just about anything that you've planned for and are trying to do at scale at an institution. What I see currently in my role in coaching presidents and other senior leaders across the country, I would say that the primary barrier that most leaders are facing is just cultural resistance. And the resistance on campus comes in a number of different flavors. First, there's just the general institutional inertia that comes from thinking that these endeavors are going to be just one more add-on, and perhaps we can wait this one out and see if the trend changes and this loses its level of importance from the presidential or senior leadership level, and we can just carry on with our work. It brings to mind this one institution that I've worked with in the past. I went on campus and the folks on campus were like, well, yeah, but we've got to do our equity work, and we've got to do our leadership work, and we've got to do our strategic plan work, and then we've got to do our day jobs. And so that becomes one of the barriers in getting this spread throughout the campus across multiple departments and divisions, is when folks see this type of work as just one more thing that they have to do. There's also a little bit of fear of the unknown and the new. Most of our faculty in particular are trained as subject matter experts, but not necessarily in high impact practices, in embedding co-curricular activities as part of their pedagogical strategies. And so sometimes there's an initial sort of denial of going into this because it's not part of what they've been trained on, where their expertise lies. And it can be a little daunting for them on how to bring this into the classroom, especially when their focus is on getting through course competencies for a particular area of study. And then from an administrative perspective, there's also a resistance bred over concern about ever-shrinking resources. And so we see this particularly in publicly funded institutions, but even in smaller private liberal arts institutions these days, finances are tight, resources are tight, and there's always a concern about straining both financial and personnel resources in doing what, again, going back to this concept of it being additional work. But then most recently, there's also been a resistance in engaging, particularly in civic learning and democratic engagement, for fear of political backlash. And folks on campus tend to want to play it safe, fearing that their efforts to promote civic engagement could be seen or misconstrued as promoting a particular party's agenda. And so those are some of the challenges that I'm seeing, some of the hesitation that I see from presidents and other senior leaders in moving these initiatives at scale at the institution comes from some of these factors that we see across campuses in our nation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So you did a wonderful job detailing the challenges. How do we overcome them? What do effective leaders do to mitigate some of these challenges?
And that's, I think, that the happy ending on all of this is that there is a way to mitigate all of these challenges that we see on campus. And what I have seen the most effective leaders do is really starting out with clear communication. That's the primary vehicle to overcoming a lot of these barriers. First, it's communication of civic engagement as a clear priority for the institution to promote its mission and its vision. Once that priority is made clear, and if it's clearly articulated as part of the institution's strategic plan or high-level priorities, then it's easier to take civic learning endeavors and prioritize resources to then support those efforts. Also, providing a clear message that this is not an add-on, but part of the day job is important. I think leaders often underestimate the ability of folks to easily connect the dots among the different things that they're doing on campus. And so clearly communicating how all of the work that is at a priority level of the institution is interconnected and meant to promote students' success is one of the most important things that leaders can do. This also can be accomplished through structured professional development, particularly for faculty and in the area of high impact practices. It's important that faculty and staff can see their role in co-creating this work on campus, but they're often going to need support for that, and making sure that we have the professional development prepared for them to be able to engage is one of the most important avenues to get their buy-in and commitment to this work. In my work at my prior institution at Miami-Dade, this collaborative work between faculty and staff coupled with professional development was really the key to a lot of the great work that we did there. We had not only curricular maps to our learning outcomes, but we also had co-curricular maps to those outcomes. We ensured that faculty had access to professional development and project-based learning. And then we also focused in on other high impact practices. We had a center, the Center for Civic Engagement and Democracy. I saw that Josh Young, its director, is joined us here today. That center helped to support faculty in connecting service learning opportunities for students with needs in the community, as well as other activities to promote students' civic engagement. And then we slowly evolved into a structure under the umbrella of change-making initiatives to afford all students an opportunity to be change makers within their community. And this comes back to something I think we've heard already from John and Mac as well, is how do we refocus the work that we're doing at our colleges to support community needs And this starts by using clear data that assesses the needs of the community and then engage students through project-based learning, service learning, other activities to address those needs. At Achieving the Dream, we've been focusing on new work with several of our colleges, testing out a new framework and theory of change around what we call community vibrancy, where we're now relegating the traditional big picture outcomes of completion and employment to not being our ultimate outcomes, but rather milestone momentum metrics, and really honing in on societal gains, such as increased homeownership, decreased incarceration, increased access to health benefits, as the ultimate outcomes that we're striving for within our colleges. So it's refocusing on community impact and seeing that colleges are just one more member of the community and really engaging other partners across the community in this work so that as students go through their educational programs, they begin to develop their agency, their voice, and their role through their own career in advancing their communities.
And the politicization of higher education that you mentioned before really leads us to the importance of moral courage and moral resilience now at a time when so many individuals feel coerced into making decisions they believe are unethical. And thank you for your always exercising moral courage in what you do. We're going to turn now to President Thompson. The Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education has played a leadership role in advancing civic learning. So tell us about the initiatives you've led so successfully.
Thank you, Leanne. Good to see everybody. I want to set this up first with just letting you know I'm the president of the Council on Post-Secondary Education, which means that we're the coordinating body for 8 public universities and 16 community colleges. So they fit under our umbrella. And a part of my role in Kentucky as the head of higher education is to set the strategic agenda for the state that are colleges, community colleges, technical colleges, as well as 4-year, will build their plans around. So when I took over higher ed, part of what I wanted to have in that strategic agenda is something around civic engagement. And I want to make sure I read this correctly here. The statement is the statewide post-secondary agenda identifies the civic responsibility of college-educated citizens as a part of our value proposition for higher education. So it became part of our quality agenda. We talk a lot about the quantitative outputs, putting more degrees and certificates out there where people can get jobs that pay sustainable wages and all of that. But we knew that we also want to be on the front end of defining what quality meant. So in that game, what we did was we start working with employers, faculty, and staff, and others to identify exactly what are those essential skills that are needed for every college-educated person we had to go out and exist in this society. Civic engagement became a part of those 10 essential skills, employability skills that we identified. We call that the graduate profile. So we took up then this other piece. Once again, we had employers in on the front end helping us to do this work, as well as the campuses. We brought people together with these identification markers, and we did a lot of self-assessments. We went in and identified exactly where we didn't have it. And we're still in that process of identifying what we do have in place and how we can bring it in a systematic process to use it. But the other item that we knew, we had to put it in our thread. It just couldn't be something you did on the side. And that's kind of what we had done in the past. We felt like it had to be very much a part of our curriculum, our pedagogy, our process of even evaluation of faculty and others in many cases, to know that we're doing this work toward this quality agenda. And so we create the graduate profile, which all of our institutions are engaged in. They bring teams in with them. And in those teams, in those areas, whether it's critical thinking, working with diverse populations, civic engagement and democracy, wherever those lie, we are bringing all the people in together to identify mastery elements so we can actually measure how a student is progressing through the process. the interesting part that I think we're doing here is that everybody now wants to be a part of it. It's not seen as a secondary item. It's seen now as a core piece of the way we're doing business and how we're doing it. K-12, they were able to get the legislature passed the bill where they had to do a half credit in K-12 around civic engagement, civic responsibility. But they've also identified, and I'm on the board of education, they've identified something what they call the profile of a graduate, what they need to have in order to move into a college setting. Now we're lining up the profile of a graduate with a graduate profile, so we have a P20 item going along. Then we got workforce with us that are helping us to design, as well as buying into the students that we're giving them to say, this person has been certified to be able to do this kind of work, and we want those people to do so. So where we're at now in this overall graduate profile work, with civic engagement being a clear essential piece of that, we are building that framework throughout the P20 system. We are working with pedagogical processes to make sure our faculty are trained. Once again, we're bringing faculty, staff, students, and administrators into this process to make sure that we are doing the work we need to do. We're establishing a repository of all this work that we're doing, like with MSC and everybody else, where people can have resources that will help facilitate for them to have. But we're also getting our student affairs leaders to identify all these co-curricular items that becomes a part of the thread again, that how they're working with the curricular processes to do the things that we need to do to make sure that a student is getting that quality set of knowledge that we want them to have. And where we're at now too, other than working with groups to identify the mastery elements of it, we also build the general education policy out. This will be our new gen ed policy, is around this graduate profile work, where the courses and everything fits in to those competencies that we feel like every student will need. Speaking of my friend who's in accreditation, we're accredited by the regional accreditors, SAC COC. So we have campuses already that's made this their quality agenda and put it in place for SACs. But we're also wanting to make sure that we can measure after our students leave us and go out and get employment, that they're continually using this knowledge as a way to not just in the workplace, but to be better citizens. Don't know how we're going to do that yet, but we're going to do it. So that's the last piece of the agenda. But the item that I guess I want to say, that if you're going to do this right, you can't do it haphazardly. You can't do it with it sitting out there by itself with the hope that people will take up the gauntlet and run with it. We have to make it a part of what we consider to be a very equitable process, that everybody can take part in this democracy, but also a quality agenda that people can see that we're not just educating people that have a certificate, say they have a degree, but they have the qualitative knowledge to use that degree in order to actually make our society better.
That's fantastic. You mentioned MSC. Tell us a bit about how you benefited from involvement with the multi-state collaborative.
Well, I think there's several benefits. We were one of the early entrants, I guess, into this. But a part of it is a lot of the knowledge we're gaining from our partners, and hopefully they're gaining from us, this set of dialogue as much as anything else. Yes, we have materials, we have all kinds of stuff that you guys are bringing to us that's rich, but that's a good thing. But the best thing is that we can sit there and work through some ideas. We can sit there and look at exactly what are the problems that people are seeing in wherever they're at, and how we can help them solve their problems as they're helping us solve ours. So it's a community system that actually, and by the way, just let me be clear, we've been involved in things like the Love Campus Compact. I love all those items, but we are now in the last several years with people like Campus Compact's been our partners. We're, in my opinion, someone who's been doing this for 37 years, we've seen more impact once MSC has been in place in the last many years, simply because we're now depending on each other to really be an accountability partner, one, but number two, being a partner that's willing to share and help us to get better.
Thank you again. And certainly, Carol Gary Schneider has played a leadership role in really promoting the kind of success of these initiatives.
Well, and she's been doing this, I won't say how long because we've known each other for a while, but Carol, you got to give Carol the credit here, right? You got to give her the kudos because she's been talking this for a long time. Just many of us are slow enough to finally come around listening, I guess.
Thank you so much. Raj, we've been talking about individual action, but the focus of this is collective action. So how can we galvanize presidents and inspire collective rather than individual action on campuses?
I'd love to jump into that, but before I do, Lynn, I just want to thank you, AAC&U, and we just mentioned Carol Gary Schneider and CLDE for all the work that you're doing, the recent report that came out. It's also so energizing to be, and I'm just honored to be on this panel to just hear about all that's going on across the country. And so I just want to thank you for also bringing us together. To your question, the College Presidents for Civic Preparedness was founded because presidents wanted to leverage collective power. It was created as a coalition of the willing, starting with 15 presidents who really wanted to leverage their collective work, learn from each other, and be able to, frankly, create some air cover for the work that they wanted to do and the work that they wanted to sustain. Because the messages we kept hearing over and over again is that it was very difficult to sustain bold initiatives in these areas, that the pushback from many different stakeholders made it difficult. And so creating something like this would be helpful to them. And that is what we're doing. And we're also seeing this collective power elsewhere. I will just point out as one example that we're now at 108 college presidents who have committed, signed to civic commitments, who are part of our work. There's what I'll call kind of a leaders in the charge, a smaller set of presidents who are engaging in something that we call campus-wide immersion. They are focused especially around the notions of how you develop, educate, and practice civil discourse on campuses so that you really build that muscle, use it multiple times. So by the time you graduate, you have had lots of time to practice that. And they have also acknowledged that every institution has a center, has partnerships, works with different members of their faculty and so on. But very few, and in fact, none of them actually looked at touching every single student every year. And so this campus-wide immersion collective work is about creating action plans together, creating a set of shared measurement to both the comments that Aaron and Mac were making about the necessity for assessment here. But how do you actually measure this? What are we learning? What case studies can we create for ourselves? And frankly, for the broader field, as we're learning in this implementation, because, Lenore talked about this, in the end, you've got a lot of hurdles that you're going to have to overcome during the implementation process. And being able to create these case studies and actually measure and learn is going to help everyone in the field do this work. And so that's where the collective power really starts, the flywheel starts to move, and you start to create the momentum that's necessary.
For those who've made this extra commitment to playing a leadership role in this arena, what has inspired them to do so? What's the sense of urgency that they feel at this moment in time for doing this work?
I think so. I would separate out kind of two groups of people. There's, of course, an overlapping set. I will say that, there are the true believers, and, John Alger is, of course, one of them. He's been a true believer for a long time. And of course, we all know because he's been involved in so many of these institutions that are at the center of this work. And so for them, it is, I'm going to put words in your mouth, John. It's not only about making sure the institution does this, but the field starts to prioritize this. And how does it do that? So you start to create tailwinds instead of headwinds. There's also, I would say, right, we came out publicly with 15 college presidents, August 15th of last year. We're now at 108 college presidents. I think there's just been a recognition with so many things that are going on, right? From a legislative process, from, October 7th, from getting ready for the election, protests and so on, that institutions really need to prioritize this, that it's not nice to have, it actually is a need to have in how we think about educating our students. And so, part of it is the true believers, part of it is people who've just come to recognize the priority and said, look, we want to do this. How can we learn from each other?
Are you optimistic about the future?
You know, after this panel, I very much am. And, you know, I mean, I think it shows something that you have so many college presidents who are talking about this. And Lynn, I mean, you and I know this because, you know, we were just at another place that was talking about this and prioritizing and so on. And so now it is about leveraging both individual actions and collective action, and then sharing and learning from that, right? That has to be part of this work because we're all going to make mistakes, but learning from each other will only help galvanize and accelerate this work.
Thank you so much, Raj. And I really appreciate your calling out AAC&U's work. So many of the initiatives that have been outlined are in perfect alignment with the ongoing work that's taking place at AAC&U, especially through our Institute for Democracy in Higher Education. It's a nonpartisan research center that's led by Nancy Thomas that really strives to improve student learning for an institutional commitment to a democracy that works for everyone. And we all know that our democracy has not worked for everyone in the past. So it's aspirational and taking seriously the current needs. We also have some resources in terms of webinars, our recent publications. There's one on the effects of community-based and civic engagement in higher education that has arisen from Ashley Finley's work in the Office for Research and Public Purpose, and AAC&U and Campus Compact joined together in publishing Nick Longo's Practicing Democracy work. So we're excited about the days ahead, the possibility of strengthening our coalition to ensure that we meet AAC&U's mission of advancing the democratic purposes of higher education by promoting equity, innovation, and excellence in liberal education, but also fulfilling our nation's historic mission of educating for democracy in each of our individual missions, which are grounded in our commitment to student success and positioning them for a life of purpose and thriving. So please join me in thanking our panelists, and they were extraordinary, and I couldn't have asked for more. For the next portion of our program, you should select one of the concurrent sessions that are going to be held in the breakout rooms. And if for some reason the breakout options don't pop up on your screen, you can locate them under More in the Zoom controls. And we're so excited to have you for this portion of our programming. So thank you again for all that you do every single day to further our shared mission.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carol Geary Schneider, and it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to this capstone session of our two-part launch of the CLDE Coalition's report, Every Student, Every Degree, College Civic Learning for Today's Students and Tomorrow's Democracy. The Coalition's ambitious agenda is signaled in the very title of the report, Every Student, Every Degree. And in this spirit, today's sessions have all been designed to help you, the participants in this webinar, work together on the many, many practical steps involved in achieving this kind of goal for your students, your particular institutional context, and your particular community context. We've just rolled through the screen to show you a list of full participation institutions. That's a title used in the report itself. And it signals our knowledge that there are hundreds of institutions across this country, 2-year institutions, 4-year institutions, large, small, public, private, that had made civic learning part of what it means to earn a degree at that institution. And every person who spoke to you in the last round of concurrent sessions was from a full participation institution. And in addition, there are about 35 other full participation institutions that registered for this, including Portland State, that was just called out in the last session that I attended. So all of this is to inspire us to recognize that what we're calling for, every student, every degree, is possible. And then the question is, how can we all band together to make it happen? So now it is my pleasure to introduce our final session in which we explore the views from philanthropy. Philanthropic leaders are going to share their advice on making college CLDE inclusive, high impact, and funded, and on public narratives that can work to support this cause. So I'm the chair, Carol Geary Schneider, and we will be joined by Deborah Humphreys, who is Vice President of Strategic Engagement at Lumina Foundation, Isabel Roche, Executive Director of special programs in higher education at the Endeavor Foundation. J.B. Rorison, Senior Program Officer at the Gates Foundation. So thank you all for joining us. And I want to say a special word of thanks to Isabel and the Endeavor Foundation, which did make possible the report we are talking about, the webinars that we were part of, and indeed this whole effort of movement building that we've been engaged in. So special thanks to you, Isabel. But now let's get right to it. I want to start with you, Isabel, and I want to start with my knowledge that Endeavor has been at this for a very long time, at least 2 decades, maybe longer. You've been supporting institutions and initiatives that have been building civic engagement one way or another into their curricular DNA. I'd just like you to talk with us about how the Endeavor Foundation thinks about this. What are the values that are driving this, and what might they imply for this national movement broadly?
Thanks, Carol. Just want to start by saying I'm really happy to be here today and have enjoyed all the sessions so far. And there's been so much synergy and overlap in the discussions that, I'm still going to start with something that, feels very foundational to say, although everyone's been saying it in different ways since 3:30, which is that we're all here on this call because we believe that education is a cornerstone of democracy, and also because we believe in what education can do and its transformational power. And, transformational is a big word, but it's really worth recalling that it is actually what education can deliver. It opens our minds to the world. It expands our capacity to make, do, question, communicate, collaborate, empathize. It exposes us to new perspectives, unexplored ideas. It ignites our curiosity. It develops our self and social awareness. And in doing all of these things, education ignites our individual potential and, equally importantly, serves the social good. And the Endeavor Foundation, since its founding in the 1950s, in making education and higher education a centerpiece of its work, and working primarily but not exclusively with liberal arts colleges, it has been nurturing the conditions for this kind of active and engaged transformational learning to occur. And the reason is to enable, again, these kind of twin purposes, the intellectual and academic growth and maturation of all students, and attending at the same time to their emotional, social, ethical, and civic development. And so the skills that lead us to individual fulfillment and purpose are also the skills of the citizen. And this is what we've been hearing over and over since 3:30 this afternoon. And we have to seize the opportunity to view the years that students are in college as a time to develop both of these things as fully as possible. And that is why Endeavor has been and remains committed to civic education. So that's the first thing. Do you want me to talk a little bit about also the
Making it the norm? Yes.
Yeah, making it the norm. I'll just jump right into that. So how are we going to make this the norm? I think there are 3 areas that we're thinking about and really feel like you all at CLDE are like putting all of your efforts behind. First is cutting through the noise about higher education. I don't think I need to rehearse what it is here. We all know, and I think Deborah's going to talk about that in a little bit. But that to really see that civic learning and democracy engagement isn't another lane in competition with other higher ed imperatives, but it's actually kind of a boosting agent to the efforts of student engagement, student success, attainment, workforce development, and more. So that's a really important thing, I think, number one. Secondly, I think that there is work to be done to connect within higher ed the different areas and movements of civic focus and action. I wasn't able to attend the first webinar, but I watched the recording. And as I think, I'm not sure it was you, Carol, or Martha said at the opening, like these areas need to be connected. There's a lot happening in different groups, dialogue across difference, community engaged service learning, broader education and democracy efforts. These need to be more explicitly connected, have a shared language, a shared North Star, as CLDE is trying to initiate, so that people and funders are willing to invest time, resources, or both. And then third, this is something that you're also, I think, really trying to get us all behind, is getting all of these various actors to work in tandem. So educators, of course, that's administrators and very importantly, faculty on the ground, but also policymakers and accreditors and more. So I think those are the three things that I would say to get us going.
Well, thank you very much. And now I want to turn to Jamie. If you had been able to attend all 6 concurrent sessions, which no one could, but I talked to all the people in them beforehand, and if you did hear the opening session, the word student success came up again and again as something that should be connected to this. And of course, student success, equitable student success, has been the North Star for the Gates Foundation for quite some time. So just thinking broadly, Jamie, what are the chances that we're going to succeed in persuading philanthropy to itself see the interconnections between student success and civic engagement? And you might want to talk about the post-secondary value work that you have led as well.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here. So I'm actually going to pull on the thread that Isabel started around the interconnectedness of all of these pieces while students are enrolled. I think it's important for us all to just, I think we're all on the same page here, but to realize that when we think about outcomes as well, there's such a strong correlation and connection between the various benefits that students and society reaps from a strong post-secondary sector, individual institutions and collectively. And so the Post-Secondary Value Commission work, which I was fortunate to lead, I was telling this story to Carol last week on the call. This is not something that we included in the final report. So when we first started this work, as the Gates Foundation sort of funding it, we went in with a pretty clear and narrow perspective. Like, we want to bring together a blue ribbon commission to help us understand the economic benefits that college provides to students. We were in the meeting with our commission, 30 experts from across the country. I'm going to say it was about 7 minutes into that first full day meeting where, we got some really strong and important feedback that helped us to broaden the view of the scope of that work. It's not that the Gates Foundation does not believe that there are benefits to post-secondary education beyond just, dollars and cents, but we thought, like, this is a critical moment for us to really double down on this piece. And we realized again that you cannot talk about the economic benefits of higher ed without thinking about the non-economic. You can't think about what students reap from the experience without thinking about how they contribute to their communities, to their states, to the national economy, to our culture, all of those pieces. And so I think still, and I don't want to get too far ahead because I know we're going to talk about public perception and sort of what we're seeing these days. But I just think it's so important for us to not think about this as an either or. I was looking at the very impressive list of full participation institutions that scrolled on the screen. I did not immediately just go to my database and look at how they perform on some of the economic metrics, but I imagine and I actually feel quite confident in saying that those institutions are providing a full wealth of benefits to their students that go, certainly the civic benefits are clear based on their commitment to this initiative, but I'm sure they're providing just a plethora of other benefits. So at the end of the day, we did want to make sure that we gave clear attention to a large array of benefits in our framework, civic engagement being one of the critical non-economic benefits that really toes the line between individual benefit and societal benefit. So, but to directly answer your question after beating around it for 3 minutes, I think the extent to which philanthropy writ large is going to engage in this space, I think there's strong possibility. I'm so happy to be on a panel with Deborah Humphreys, frankly. I don't see enough of her, and she's one of my favorite people. We all work pretty closely together, coordinate. We're a friendly community. And so, if it's not something that the Gates Foundation is going to support directly, and that's not saying that that's necessarily the case, we do try to help each other to carve out our niches in ways that we can all collectively have impact on the world, which doesn't necessarily mean that we're all doing the same things, but I'll leave it at that.
Okay, great, thank you. And Deborah, so I'll ask a slightly different question to you, but it's certainly related to what Jamie was just saying, and Isabel too. At Lumina, post-secondary attainment has been for a long time the top priority. But I had just happened to know, because I've known you for a long time, that the foundation is also exploring how philanthropy can contribute to democracy success and how Lumina can. So I'm just interested in what you can tell us about how that exploration is going and whether you are seeing movement in what I would call the right direction toward bringing together the attainment, the student success, and the civic engagement themes.
Thank you, Carol, and I want to add my level of congratulations for a fantastic report and a really great day today and set of sessions. And right back at you, Jamie. Like Jamie and I are you know, fan girl boy, whatever. And you're right, we don't get to talk nearly enough about our mutual interests, but there are many. I think that I want to echo both Isabel and Jamie and several of the earlier speakers' points about the sort of both and way of thinking about this, because I think that is also how we have thought about it for a long time, although I think we haven't always made it as explicit as we could. And so, you know, you all know, many of you know, Lumen has been organizing its work around this attainment goal for a long time, which has become, I think people have seen it in a narrower sense than we have always meant it, which is interesting. You know, we have been trying to advance this goal of increasing the number of people in America who have high quality credentials. And people translate that into a sort of version of student success, definitely finishing the credential. And then Jamie and his work has added this really fundamental question about value and what that means. What is a valuable credential? But the reason why we have been working on that is because we felt that that increased attainment would actually help us meet our mission. And Lumina's mission is all about better preparing people for a global economy and for informed citizenship. And so we've always felt that getting those quality credentials, which we do define as providing people with this full human skill set that enables you to translate the degree into that value, is, to echo what Jonathan Alger said earlier, that skill set is the same skill set that is necessary for global competition and economic success and for informed citizenship. I think people haven't always seen that, and we can all do a better job of making that more explicit. I think there's a second component of this, though, that we see as sort of fundamental, which is that a fundamental sort of fundamental to our democracy's health and well-being is a commitment to expanding more equitable opportunity. And I know Jamie's worked really hard on this, and Isabel as well. Like, that has been core to everything that we have done for a very long time. But again, I don't think we've made explicit that that is part of why our democracy can be strong, only when we actually fulfill that mission of expanding more equitable opportunity. Final thing I'll say is that, as Carol knows, we've supported CLDE and a number of other groups in the last few years. And I think there's sort of, to me right now, there's kind of two embattled pillars of a democratic society. And we're one, higher education. The other, I would say, is a free press, which we also have done quite a bit of work in. And those two things together are both essential to democracy and also embattled. And so that has shaped our sense of that and of the moment we're in, that embattlement moment. We could talk more about what I mean by that, but many of you probably have a sense of that, has informed kind of how we've leaned into the more recent funding. And there've been sort of three big areas that have gone directly to, like, how should higher education today be supporting democracy? And there's been three areas. Some of you may have attended the earlier session that my colleague Terry Taylor was in. Terry organizes all our work and oversees all our work in this area. And she's been organizing the investments in three areas. One, sort of what are the conditions for democratic renewal and redesign? So not just how do we preserve our democratic institutions or shore them up as they are, but how do what are the conditions we need to re-engage question? Second is learning for active citizenship, which is the bucket in which we have funded CLDE and a number of other groups that are on this call. What are those skills? Do we have the right skill set, right? Are we advancing the right skill sets for today and for citizenship today? And then the third, which we probably wouldn't have done in an earlier era, is just responding to sort of threats to what we call the freedom to learn, right? We took for granted that that was something, you know, people believed in as one of those pillars of higher education, as a strong part of our democracy, and they're under threat. And we've been supporting PEN America and Peril and some other groups, and we also have a big initiative about, as I said, free press. And so we're part of the Press Forward initiative, which is another philanthropic effort around local media and supporting local media. And so I think that's a sort of, in a nutshell, it's kind of a selection of things we're doing, all in this interest of that both and vision that Jamie and Isabel and others have articulated.
Okay, thank you very much. There's so much to dig into there, but we do have limited time, and I want to get back to Isabel. So I want to pick up on the theme that you introduced in your first comments. Isabel, you've said that Endeavor is strongly committed to the social and individual transformative power of liberal arts education, or as I would say, liberal education. But that said, we're all committed to the broad learning. We all benefited from the broad learning that we characterize as liberal or liberal arts education. I'm wondering if there's anything that you are seeing that liberal arts committed institutions could be doing to better connect the practical learning that everybody's looking for with what we're talking about now. So anything that you would recommend or suggest?
So,
okay.
So we know that there's a kind of persistent, pernicious narrative about the irrelevance of liberal arts education to careers, their practicality in general. I'm just going to leave that aside because we know it's not true. So let's just put that over there. There's plenty of evidence to the contrary. But there is another aspect of the practical value debate, I think, where liberal arts colleges, liberal arts education, liberal arts orientation, and colleges and universities that espouse them more generally have an opportunity that isn't being fully seized. And that is not fully integrating or recognizing the learning that's happening, including important civic learning, small d democracy learning, through work and in the career preparation sphere. This is not going to be a surprise to Deborah because we've been talking about this for years, back to when I was at Bennington College, and we had a grant with Lumina and a number of other institutions to really think about work integrated learning. We all know that the decline in public confidence in higher education is in no small part linked to the ever-rising costs that are felt more keenly as economic inequality widens and students are required to take on more debt. And higher ed, because it can't actually tackle the cost problem directly or independently, has shifted the focus to the outcomes that justify the investment, and that is high-paying jobs and career prep, right? And so it has the tendency to treat a student's education and career preparation like they're two different things. And instead of doing that, instead of intentionally filtering the career preparation and experience through important developmental and educational lenses. And so drawing out how students have experiences in internships, through mentoring, field-specific community engaged learning, and more, making those connections is something that's, you know, really, really important and is an opportunity. And I really want to offer this, like what I'm saying, as an opportunity and not as a critique, because these are really, you know, tough things to tackle. And there are a lot of campuses and colleges that are already working on integrating work in a learning framework in really interesting and important ways. And I won't mention specific ones, but there are a lot out there. But there's still a lot of work to be done. And it seems to me that that is an opening, you know, given the context in which we're here today, talking about how we can really advance civic learning and democracy engagement, really thinking about how the time that students spent in career preparation is also time that they are getting experience, exposure, to those fields and their cultures and how they connect to society in all kinds of new ways. Yet we're not really helping them harness in the educational setting what that means, how it connects to what they're learning in other spheres. And so it would be, I think that's a place where, in this larger value, practical value conversation for liberal learning, that's a place to interrogate more and kind of dig into.
We at the coalition are seeing that as an area that needs a lot of work. We've put it in our learning framework, but to say there should be civic connections with your career studies and to make sure it happens are two relatable but not yet related things. So thank you.
Yes.
So now I want to turn to you, Deborah, and more broadly to the question of the work that Lumina has commissioned on public narratives that higher education is now confronting, and especially how we might respond constructively to what are, in fact, I'll use Isabel's word, pernicious public narratives that we are seeing all the time. So if you could tell us about that work and how it could be useful to those who are engaged in trying to make civic learning a priority, a career-connected priority for their students.
Yeah, thank you very much. Isabel, so I thank you for reminding me about that grant. It was one of the very first grants I made 8 years ago with Bennington College under Mariko Silver's leadership and Isabel's leadership about work integrated learning. And you're right, again, it's a moment of like, it's not either or, like it has to be an integration of these two things. Particularly if we're going to respond adequately to the current moment and people's skepticism, because that issue of value and putting people on a path to genuine opportunity, social mobility, and success is a threshold issue. We cannot get to all of the other things we want to talk about unless we get to that and respond to it. And it's not either or, but it's super important. So as Carol knows, one of the things that I've been doing at Lumina for the past 8 years is leading an effort to really try to understand in depth, like what is the narrative landscape we're working in. And so we've been working with a firm called Protagonist that does kind of big data, AI related work to try to just map landscapes. And they map landscapes for all kinds of social impact kinds of areas. So we've been mapping the landscape on post-secondary education all the way back to 2016. So if you all take your mind back there, a lot has changed from then to now. And there's sort of 3 big areas that have shifted. One, obviously the narratives that are out there have evolved. Some have actually gotten more solutions oriented than they were in 2016. So that's really exciting. See it, Isabel. But we also know that we have a far more polarized set of narratives now than we did in 2016. It's much more ideologically divided, and it's really it's been really, really important to dive deeply into that, to try to understand and unpack what is really happening and how those narratives are being advanced. So one of the things that we've done is we did a really deep dive into the conservative media ecosystem, which has been very effective and successful in advancing a set of narratives about higher education, and particularly about higher education's commitment to equity. And in a weird way, they've sort of claimed, frankly, the civic engagement space in an interesting way, not necessarily in the way that some of us think of it, but they have claimed that space. And so we've done a sort of deep dive into that. And one of the things that I think we've come to understand is, one, that ecosystem is very disciplined and very clear. And they have only a few narratives they're driving home. And every possible story that they can fit into those narratives, for instance, there's a big narrative out there about wokeism coming to the corner, and particularly higher education, and how bad that is. And they can sort of take almost any story and like fit it under that space. And what we realized is that we don't have a similar like counter narrative to that is as disciplined, right? We have lots of narratives. We have a lot of things to say about all kinds of stuff, all of them good things, student success and employment and civic engagement, and all this stuff. But we're not as disciplined about sort of driving home the larger purposes of higher education, what the value is, and why it's so important to individuals and society. And we have to get better at that, I would say. Now, the good news is, I will say that
Oh, so she has apparently frozen and just short of the good
Looking
news.
at the current environment,
Okay.
that we can have an impact, and we are having an impact. So I'll share just two points. We're doing some additional work, testing messages about the overall value of higher education. How do we make the case for higher education and its value? And I think that there's good news and bad news. The bad news for this community is people just do not associate higher education with citizenship. It's not the connection that they automatically make. Jamie's instinct at the beginning of the value project was right. The thing they think about first is economic opportunity and whether the value is going to be there for them on that. So that's both good news and bad news, right? It's bad news they don't think about it. It's good news in the sense that it's white space, pretty much, that we can then fill, right? And there have been a couple of messages we've been sort of testing. We started with our mission, right? Informed citizenship. That wasn't a good frame because people just don't associate it with higher education. So instead, what we've been working with are two things that actually have come up a couple of times in this session. One is Lenora Rodicio talked about thinking about our community impact. She used the phrase community impact. And our researchers are saying one message that resonates is the idea that we need communities that work, right? We need communities that work and where people are solving problems across difference. Now, none of those words have the word civic engagement, democratic engagement, none of that. But it is what people do see as something higher education can contribute to. They do actually think higher education is about equipping people with the skills to make communities that work and providing an opportunity in a space like a laboratory where we can learn how to solve problems across difference. So that's one area that we've been working with. And I want to say one final thing, data point of interest in our research. There's a couple of areas where, despite the increasing skepticism about higher education, 2/3 of those we polled actually do believe that BA degrees in particular prepare people to consider new information through a critical lens. So 2/3 think that's something that BA degrees do. And second, be more open-minded to new ideas and perspectives. So those are sort of starting points, right? You can eventually get to we need to talk about civic engagement and democracy and ways we do that. But if you start from the place where people are already thinking, oh, wait, right, communities that work, we need that, and higher education can help us with that, we think there's potential there. So we're still working on those messages, but that's where we are in that research.
Great. Thank you very much. I know everybody wants to know more about that, and we put some links in chat for you to follow up. And now, Jamie, I have an absolutely impossible question for you. We're down to the wire, but I know that you have, Gates generally, and you specifically, have been voices for the importance of shared evidence to drive any initiative and to drive this initiative. And you've heard earlier that we have a multi-state collaborative that is working on this, 14 state systems, and they too want to have shared indicators that we can look at to see, are students participating equitably? How are we doing? What are they getting out of it? So in like 2 minutes, what should we do?
Well, I'm glad to wrap this up because I'm such a fan of Deborah's work with Protagonist. And if you have not read it or looked into it, it's really incredible. I also think, and Deborah didn't say this, but I don't think she'll disagree. One of the challenges we're facing currently is the fact that data and evidence don't always resonate in public discourse. That does not mean that we should in any way step back from trying to continue to produce quality research, evidence, data, and such. I think, though, I'll just say, tying this all back together from the beginning, I love metrics. I think it's very exciting that you all are thinking about how to measure some of these outcomes. But I think, what will be most appealing to the field, potentially, it's just a hypothesis, is anchoring this on how these outcomes, in fact, are complementary to some of the other outcomes that we already know about. I would say, I said this last week, Carol, when we were talking, it would be my dream to sort of stand up some kind of task force to do some of the work to think about creating metrics for some of the non-economic benefits. It's not something that's going to happen in the immediate term, most likely. But some of these things, I think there are definitely elements of this work that are quantifiable, and there are some that are not easily. And the qualitative researcher in me will speak up now and say that that is okay. It just perhaps requires different approaches to communicating the value of the work. So my advice is please be rigorous, but do not try to create numbers where there should be words. And I think, again, these benefits don't exist in a vacuum. So don't create the false impression that they do, and leverage the opportunity to connect them to the broader narrative around all of the types of value that post-secondary education we know provides when it works well.
Thank you so much. Thanks to both of you and to Isabel, who had a medical hard stop at 5:35. So this has been incredibly stimulating and incredibly thought-provoking. And I know we would all love to continue for hours. You may have something else you were planning to listen to tonight. I don't know. There are things that are happening perhaps in the world. I do want to take just a couple of minutes to let you know, those of you who are participants in this webinar, how we intend to continue this conversation. Obviously, lots of issues have been raised and only some of them could be fully addressed. So I'm just going to talk for a couple of minutes about how we plan to create, how we are creating opportunities for you to stay connected with one another, with this work, and with the sense of a movement that is moving forward in a shared direction. So as you know, there are 5 lead partners in this coalition: AAC&U, Campus Compact, College Promise, Complete College America, the State Higher Education Executive Officers, and we're going to be taking part in all of their annual meetings. There will be working sessions, face-to-face working sessions in all cases at their annual meetings. You've also heard that we are in partnership with ACCJC. Mac Powell spoke earlier, but in fact, we're in partnership with all 7 of the institutional accrediting commissions, and they are all working in one way or another on how they can foreground civic learning as part of the accreditation self-study process. So there will be events at every one of their meetings this year, starting in November. You'll see the Northwest Commission is the first one where we have a session, and then the second one is the New England Conference of Higher Education, NECHI, in December. And in addition, there will be a working session of some kind at the Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities. So if you are from a Catholic college, look for us there. And as you have heard, there are now 14 state systems and some that may also join in the multi-state collaborative to advance civic learning. You heard what Aaron had to say, but there's so much additional great work going on. And many of those state systems are also planning state-level convenings that are intended to help scale college students' participation in civic learning and democracy engagement. So in sum, there are lots of opportunities where we can come together and continue to work together, learn from you, as well as speak with you. And we will keep you apprised of all of these through our newsletter, which now comes out every month. To everyone who's on this webinar will be on the newsletter list. We also have an evolving calendar of events that will be on our website. So one way or another, look for places where we can continue this exciting work about how we build our capacity to support this kind of work, to connect it to issues that matter to our students, to our communities, and to our democracy, and to show how it's not separate from, but rather integrally, potentially connected to the career studies that also bring so many students to college. So look for us at these events, and we thank everybody for contributing to this. We thank you for your time. We look forward to seeing you in the future.